Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association. Missouri produces wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details on the variety of products made in the state are at choosewood.com.
We hope you enjoy listening to this podcast of St. Louis on the Air, brought to you by University College at Washington University, with undergraduate and graduate programs part-time, evening, and online. University College at Washington University, offering world-class education within reach.
This is St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. As many of you know, our We Live Here team has been focusing on housing issues this season. One that keeps coming back that has had legal ramifications is nuisance ordinances, specifically in Maplewood. The story of Rosetta Watson is one such case. Following a nuisance eviction, she sued Maplewood and recently won a settlement. So where is the story now? Joining me in studio is We Live Here reporter-producer Camille Stanley. Hi, Camille. Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Okay, where are we on this whole nuisance thing in Maplewood? It keeps coming back like a bad song.
It keeps coming back, except for Miss Watson, this is a good ending. So a couple weeks ago, she reached a settlement with the city of Maplewood, and that settlement became final just a couple days ago, which she got a chunk of money, which she's using to buy a home of her own that no one can ever kick her out of. So that's good news. But part of her settlement also was changing things a little bit in Maplewood. So they have revised their ordinance a little bit to hopefully build in some more protections for vulnerable people. So.
Let's back up just a little bit and review for our audience what this nuisance ordinance situation has been and what it's all about.
So in the city of Maplewood, they use occupancy permits. And they also have a nuisance ordinance. So a nuisance ordinance is what it sounds like. It's what the city uses to kind of control things that it thinks are a nuisance. The problem is within its policy, it was very explicit in that it talked about the number of police calls. So if an address generated a certain number of police calls, in Maplewood's case, if there were more than 2 calls within a 6-month period, you could be sucked into the nuisance violation process. And if they determine that you were a nuisance, one thing that they could do is they could yank your occupancy permit, which means you can no longer live in that town.
And it's difficult to find another place, obviously. There are all sorts of ripple effects from something like this.
All sorts of ripple effects.
Now, in Rosetta Watson's case, as I recall, she was the victim of domestic abuse, correct? And that's why she was calling the police, and that's why she was declared a nuisance.
Yes, that is exactly what happened here. We know that she was not the only person, but she was the one who stepped forward. Other organizations have looked at Maplewood's. They looked at their data for the last few years and found multiple instances, and they were troubled by the fact that the folks who were being declared public nuisances, it fell along some familiar patterns that we see. Domestic violence victims, people of color, people with mental issues, people who might just need to call the police sometimes.
You would talk to Rosetta Watson in the latest episode of We Live Here, but also to some other people. And what I found interesting this time is that people are connecting dots between Maplewood and other places in the country, that the Maplewood settlement case of Rosetta Watson may be the template for other places.
Yeah, and it also borrows from a template of what's going on around the country. So these nuisance ordinances are not unique to the St. Louis region. It's just that Maplewood had a pretty unique and very explicit instructions in there that legal advocates say was, unconstitutional. But many cities have just kind of blanket nuisance ordinances or crime-free ordinances, and the problem is how they end up getting used.
Well, Maplewood is changing its ordinance. Are other places doing that as well? Is the pressure on elsewhere as it has been here?
Legal and housing advocates hope that this builds pressure locally because they've seen what happened in Maplewood and across the country. There's, kind of a stealth kind of network of folks that take a look to see, hey, does my community have something like this? And if they do have something like this, how is it being used? And is it harming anyone. So the answer is yes, but it's still a little bit early to see like how much pressure will that, where the dominoes will fall if they fall.
What is the role now of the Equal Housing Opportunity Council?
So they have continued. They also sued the city of Maplewood, except that their lawsuit was dismissed by a federal judge because he found that the data that they had, he didn't feel like it. They needed more. But they have continued to be in contact with local jurisdictions here, and they're using the Maplewood settlement to say, hey, you should look at this because it could cost your city money if you get in trouble down the road. They're hoping that people just change on their own, but yes.
Well, as we say in the business, this is a story that still has legs and probably will have for a while, huh?
It does. It does.
And it's available as of today, the podcast?
The podcast is available anywhere you get your podcast.
Anywhere you get your podcast. Camille Stanley, thank you so much for being with us. Support for We Live Here comes from the Hammond Institute for Free Enterprise at Lindenwood University. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to sustainable and sound conservation of the state's forests, which support more than 41,000 Missouri jobs, resulting in a $10 billion industry. ChooseWood.com.